the reason I wanted to skip it is because I wanted to go into, let's move over to Apple TV and let's talk about this film, which I have some props for. I am really excited to talk about this film, as it is a basketball documentary released by Apple TV. Maybe that's already tipped my hand too much, but it is about one of the greatest point guards in the history of the NBA. It is called Steph Curry Underrated, which, if you're watching this video right now, you're probably and fairly like, Ben, you're a Sacramento Kings fan, clearly by your background. You got your Mike Bibby 3 foot bobblehead signed by Mike Bibby behind you. You hate Steph Curry, right? How are you going to review a film about Steph Curry called Underrated and do it seriously and actually be able to objectively review this film? The answer is I'm not. I am not going to be able to review this film objectively. I may be able to point to moments of criticism that I find genuine, that I believe that any film reviewer would be able to point to, but there is also going to be a lot of hater central from me. So I'm not really reviewing this film as a critic here. I am reviewing this film as, let's just call it, a professional hater. So I have my Sacramento Kings hat. And for certain parts of this review, I will be wearing this, noting that I am a hater professionally in this section. So let's start with Steph Curry Underrated. And I'm going to be wearing the hat right away because Steph Curry Underrated is a terrible documentary. This is dreadfully bad. I cannot believe how bad Steph Curry Underrated is as a film and what it is trying to achieve. Steph Curry Underrated really looks at his time as a college basketball player. It doesn't really focus much on the NBA. It is juxtaposed to these scenes, which I believe would be the 2021 2022 season, which is when they win their championship. This is the squad with Andrew Wiggins, Jordan Poole, all of it kind of before it all goes south with the Draymond punch. Their their last championship, that I should say, that they've won, and that's where we follow some of it. So this film is largely more about Steph Curry as a college basketball player. And my issue with this documentary, besides the fact that it's just not good, but here's why it's not good. Maybe let's just start there. The reason this documentary is not good, and it's in the title of this film already, it presents Steph Curry as underrated, which means that there's this chip on his shoulder. Everyone's been telling him he's the worst, like he'll never amount to a career in the NBA, all this. And it's just this kind of like, they've won 4 championships, the Warriors have. Steph Curry's won a finals MVP. He's a 2 time back to back regular season MVP. The Warriors went 72-9 one year in the before they lost to LeBron in the finals. I just had to throw that one out there. Uh, th- it's this it's this notion that Steph Curry's in any degree underrated and presenting that story as such, where it's like he's got this chip on his shoulder and he's got to prove himself and F all the haters. That's kind of the tone of this movie. And it's really obnoxious. It's like really overbearing when they just have to keep reminding you that Steph Curry and the Warriors are always undervalued. They're always underrated. Like no one takes them seriously. Like the season is going wrong for them. Because you know what the actual truth of that 21-22 season was? Steph Curry was having a down shooting year. That Warriors team wasn't up to standards in the regular season. There were genuine worries about them actually making any deep of a playoff run. That's not revisionist history. That's just what happened by the style of the games. Steph Curry was getting older. Draymond Green was getting older. Klay Thompson was getting older and was coming back from a 2 year injury. That was the reality of it. So, thus presenting this post your playoff championship win is bizarre to me, and as the narrative focus of it. Take Michael Jordan's The Last Dance. The Last Dance is never exploring or in doubt of what happens with this season. It is exploring some of the eccentricities that went on in that Last Dance season, whether it's Rodman's weirdness, whether it's this kind of back and forth going along with it. But we know the context of that season. We know that that is the last dance. So that is a very famous basketball reference. This was going to always be their last season. And that's how we're watching the film. Not of, oh, but this team is being discounted and they have to win the championship, like their backs are against the wall. All that. That's not what The Last Dance presents itself as. It is merely a snapshot into what was going on, what was the pressure of that season, and everything and all the weird factors that went into that, and how Michael Jordan and that Bulls team was able to overcome. In this film, it is so much more focused about the idea of like, you discounted us. We're not underrated. Like, I'm the best shooter in the league. That's what this story is, and that's what this entire documentary is. I the When we follow Steph Curry in college, he's this player that, he gets drafted. He's this undersized point guard. He's foul. He gets so much fouls in the early stages of the game. He's turning over the ball. If the 3-point ball isn't falling in, he's not going anywhere. And he gets this lesson early on before he goes into college that you have to shoot the basketball because you're undersized. You're not going to be able to play in the paint as well as other guys are. And that's where that's obviously is probably the best advice Steph Curry has ever gotten. And there are aspects of this, to be an unhater for a second, there are aspects of this Steph Curry documentary that are compelling. There is this having to navigate being an undersized point guard, having to live in the shadow of Bill Curry, his father, who was also a well respected NBA player. There's all these aspects that could have made for an interesting documentary. But then we get to his years in college, and it's again, a lot of it is portrayed as like what we already know. And that was my issue with this documentary. It's a lot of stuff that we already knew about Steph Curry, like having to develop as a shooter, what it's like and it's supposed to be like explained as like this incredible rise of this college, from this college that has no one watching, to then Steph Curry's on this team. They become a superstar because of that. Like, he becomes one of the most exciting players to watch in basketball. And I will say there are some really compelling basketball scenes in this movie. I am a Warriors hater. I have been traumatized by Steph Curry multiple times, especially what he's done to the Kings the past year, which I never need to watch that ever again. I never need to watch him play basketball against the Kings ever again. But like, I can't deny the man his talent and how just good he is at understanding the game of basketball, and his skills and his work ethic. When this movie explores that, it works. The issue again is then going back to the more narrative focus is they keep coming back to this idea of like, oh, Steph Curry had to overcome this. Steph Curry had to overcome this. Everyone, and it's this whole thing where people are like, we doubt him here, we doubt him there, we doubt him everywhere. Like, back to back to back. We doubt him, we doubt him, we doubt him, we doubt him. And I understand why that could be a kind of motivational aspect to explore this movie, but it does really just come off as obnoxious in the sense of just like, I wish they had explored maybe more of the, oh, this is what he's got. This is like him being recognized, all of that. Kind of like, again, more just seeing the story as him proving people wrong in the beginning, and then like him having to overcome. This story becomes far more of just like, at every corner, it's our backs are against the wall. We're being underrated. Like, Steph Curry is underrated here. And it's so obnoxious when we get to the final of this, when he's, declaring himself into the draft and all that. Like, it's still the same narrative by the end. Like, oh, well, he's underrated. Like, people are undervaluing Steph Curry in the draft. Like, all this, like him focusing so much on that in this film. And it just doesn't make for anything compelling at the end. I'm left with this character that I know to be one of the, if not five greatest players to ever play the game of basketball, closer to that than they are 10 of the greatest players to ever play the game of basketball. Like, he's this incredible talent in the NBA. And you could have done so much with this story, but ultimately you're left with this story of just, it's repetitive. And then, like, again, you go back to the NBA and it's just this, it's the same narrative. And it's just like, it's such an annoying thing when critiques that people are laying out against Steph Curry at this time. He's undersized. He has these weird knee issues that, it takes him until like 2013, 2014 to fully overcome that. He's missing a lot of games. Like, people really did think Steph Curry was just this player that would never be able to stay healthy. I wish we explored more of that, how he had to overcome that, how he had to, how he had to train himself to deal with all of those issues, what he learned from coaching that could apply for all of that in the NBA. But no, instead, it's just more of just like, well, you counted me out, but I'm really the best. You counted me out, but I'm really talented, et cetera, et cetera. Repeat, repeat. And then let's go back to Hater Corner for a second, just real quickly. In this documentary, that you then again get this other juxtaposition where Steph Curry, he only spends, I think, 3 years in college and he goes into the NBA draft. So he never gets his actual diploma until later on in like 21, 22. And then, like, so we're juxtaposed to him writing like his college thesis about, like, him, like what he is choosing to focus his studies in. And it's this really funny beat of the movie where he's just like, and it's so random in this movie where he's just writing about women in sports and like the impact of like sports media and female journalism and like female, I think it's actually more focused on female athletes and all that. And it's like it's supposed to be this moment where it's just like, oh, look how good Steph Curry is and he cares so much about females in sports. And it's never brought up again in the movie. It's literally kind of just in there to just be like, look, writing my essay, look how good I am, like look how great I am, I'm writing. And it kind of just, female in sports, all of that. And then it's just like, that's it, it's never brought up. So you're like, okay, did you just throw that in there so people would be like, look how great Steph Curry is, look how, like, well, look what he cares about, when it has no other narrative motivation in it. It feels so self-serving, and that's what I found this entire documentary to be. Of course, acknowledge that if this was a documentary about Chris Webber, if this was a documentary about De'Aaron Fox, I'd be all over this movie and be so much more interested in it. That is what it is to be the life of a professional hater. I will give Steph Curry, underrated, as a non-hater, a 1 star out of 4 star review. This is a pretty bad basketball documentary. You've seen way better. Check out way others ones. There's the one on Malice in the Palace, which is more interesting. The Redeem Team one on Netflix, which isn't great, but it's better than this. And just watch The Last Dance again. Really, honestly, that would be a better uh, spending of your time. As a professional Kings hater here, as someone who hates the Warriors, I'm giving this half a star. And that's my review of Steph Curry. Underrated. So let's move on. Let's move on from Haters Corner here.